the newsagents.
This is our final, our post-election Q&A. Your questions and voice notes are answers.
Well, in a sense, all the Q&As we might do in the future are post-election Q&As.
We're not doing any more.
Oh, right, okay.
This is our Friday Q&A.
By no popular demand whatsoever.
No.
Yeah, okay. So Freddie has got a question. Given the number of Conservative ex-MPs who are now looking for a job, do you think there will be an explosion in the number of political podcasts? And are you worried about the competition? Love the show. Hope you've managed to get some rest.
Freddie,
that's nice.
Look into my eyes. There are
You
no
can't.
other political podcasts. There are no other political podcasts. Repeat after me.
Correct.
There are no other political podcasts. You do not know any other political
None
podcasts.
that you need, anyway.
No. I think it's going to be reality TV for our
Yeah.
dear departed Conservative friends.
Rees-Mogg.
Little
Rees-Mogg
bit
will
of
be on
that.
Bargain Hunt or something.
Who's going to be bargain?
He'd love that. Just hanging out in some awful antiques fair in Salisbury.
And there's going to be a lot of people dancing, a lot of people on ice,
Yeah.
a lot of people, daring to win in an
Dare-
SAS sort of scenario.
Welcome to The Rest is Entertainment.
Yes. So, I don't know. We'll leave that to the competition. Let us know.
I mean, which of them would you want to hear from? Not that many of them, surely.
Also, don't forget, they have got the whole of GB News. They've literally got an entire channel
and that's
dedicated.
way less hassle.
Right.
Way
easier.
less hassle.
Yeah. You don't have to think about anything there. You
I
just
can't
go
see
on.
Sunak doing a podcast.
No.
Also, and if it would be something on like AI or something like that, something tedious. Anyway, I don't think we're going to produce anything, are we? We're not.
No,
we're
we're
no.
not.
And we're not going to give advice to people
No.
about like
No,
setting
we're
up
not.
our own competition.
Look into my eyes. Look into my eyes. There are no other podcasts.
Welcome to the newsagents.
It's Emily.
It's Lewis.
And we've lost John, haven't we?
We've lost John. Maybe not permanently. I don't think.
Where did we last have him?
Where did we last have him?
Is he down the back of the radiator?
Yeah, I don't know. I think he's having
In a drawer?
He's having a
In a
well-deserved. I think he's in. Yesterday he said, "I'm going to Manchester," and then neither of us asked why, and now we don't know. Neither of us showed
He's
any curiosity
wandered
at all.
off. No. But you might hear him pop
If you're
up.
in Manchester, you might see him today.
Exactly.
Yeah. Anyway.
Maybe he's doing a one-man show.
Yeah, maybe.
He just hasn't told us.
Maybe he's doing something with Johnny Mercer or something. Like maybe he's, going to turn up with Marcus Fish.
Yes,
Doing-
start
yeah,
a podcast.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Anyway, this one is from Greg. What struck me when listening to the podcast over the weekend is when describing the transfer of power, you keep emphasis on the word peaceful. I wonder if this is a deliberate choice. I feel we in Britain can expect a peaceful transition of power. It's not particularly remarkable, and I can't remember this being emphasised in this way during previous elections. Were you using it against the backdrop of more volatile global politics, indeed, as you mentioned, in the US? Are there any comparative examples in mind?
It's a good question. I wasn't particularly aware that it's an interesting observation because I wasn't conscious that we were doing that. I think probably post January the 6th, it has become it's absolutely true to say that in modern times, it would never have been, I think, for any of us considered that an American presidential election could be a violent inflection point. Like there would never have been a sense of sort of sharp intake of breath of thinking, oh God, there's an election, maybe it'll be contested. What might happen there? It was just part of the cycle. Obviously, since January the 6th and since the rise of Trump and his refusal to accept losers' consent, sort of election after election, that norm has been frayed extraordinarily. So I think we have become generally more aware of just the notion of a peaceful transfer of power. It has it's gone from being axiomatic, automatic, reflexive to being something that's contested.
The word I keep coming back to is majestic, funny enough, for this whole election process. And we've talked about it a bit. Because I was really struck, actually, by the graciousness of those who both won and lost.
Really gracious.
For the most part. And this sense of the enormity of what we individual voters coming together, in one collective act, have the power to do. And this isn't about the politics of left or right, it's about the politics of democracy. And I was quite weepy, actually, all weekend. Part of that is a massive lack of sleep, but even on the Thursday
and all the hypnosis
before
you've
that,
been doing recently.
Exactly.
Look into my eyes.
Yeah, and lack of alcohol. But I kept bursting into tears, and there's something just about the scale of what this country goes through, whenever it has an election, that we put ourselves through this process of saying, I, along with everyone else in the country, are going to have this one act that makes a difference. And you feel not just the responsibility, but the sense of completion. right? That we have all contributed to whatever we saw in the exit polls.
Majesty is the word.
Majesty is the word.
Majestic.
Even with or without the king, funny enough, who is an integral part still of the kind of signing off and on our new prime ministers. I mean, I think John has been traumatised by January the 6th, as many of us have really, and so that's why he used peaceful or not. But I think there has been something about the conciliatory nature, the graciousness. On Friday morning, I was sort of sitting round, the table, TV studio, hearing from a lot of those former MPs, both sides, former Tories and former Labour, and they were just all incredibly thoughtful and calm and understood the sort of personal element, I think, of what we go through when you see people standing up in front of the country, in front of their friends and family, losing their jobs. And it is a personal moment. It is, it's an incredibly courageous act in a weird way to put yourself through that.
I've actually felt like weirdly, I know what you mean about majestic. I've felt, and it's sort of deeply uncool to say this, not for the first time, but I felt like a deep sense of pride in the way it's unfolded, actually. And I know what Greg means. It's like, on one level, this should be the bare minimum in a sense, right? We're like, of course Britain's a democracy. Yeah. But I suppose partly because of what's happened in America, but also partly because of what's happened in our own country in the last few years, right? We've talked so much about the kind of fraying of democratic norms. We've had some political actors who have behaved very badly, who have not just bent those norms, but broken them.
The proroguing of Parliament, the throwing out of parliamentary standards committees, all the rest of it.
All of that sort of stuff. And to actually see a transfer of power that is not just peaceful and not just done properly and orderly, but done with so much class, right? And so much
and
much
shows
grace.
people in their best possible light. I think
and
whether it's Rishi Sunak or Starmer.
Starmer's not
coming
been
in, going out. Yeah,
Starmer's not been triumphalist. Sunak has done the absolutely proper thing constitutionally, which he stayed on as leader of the opposition, even though it must be quite humiliating for him in lots of ways. He's behaved with complete class throughout. Yeah. And just to see, and MP after MP on Twitter, who is leaving Parliament, sort of posting pictures of themselves with their successors, saying, meeting up with them, doing their handover in the office, all this sort of stuff. All of these little acts are just really, really gracious. Important because they reaffirm, what it's reaffirmed to me, and it's made me feel proud, is that despite all the problems we've had in recent years, on a deeply, deeply profound level, Britain is a profoundly a liberal democracy. Yeah, and that really, really has really mattered.
And I think this week we're back on the world stage.
Yeah,
we got hugs from Zelensky. I love this. Obviously that was me personally getting a hug from Zelensky, but hugs from Zelensky in the Oval Office, hugs from Macron, European leaders. There is something now about the sense of like, you're back. And
when Greg says, is it just the US we're thinking about? There are other examples, right? Obviously we see the French elections over the course of the last couple of weeks, and although largely peaceful, there have been examples of violence, of intimidation, of candidates complaining about all of that sort of thing, and riots and so on. So Britain is, for all of its faults, as I was saying, what the last few weeks have reaffirmed is that Britain, politically, constitutionally, has come through this period unscathed, at least for the moment.
Right, a voice note from Laura.
Hello, it's Laura from South London. I'm in the car with my husband, Prath. We're both newsagents listeners. We love the podcast. We're trying to understand why the media and a lot of the podcasts seem so complicit in talking only about Reform, who got 4 seats at this election, and not about the amazing success of the Greens or the Liberal Democrats, which shows we think that there is another mood in the country, not just a drift to the far right. And we think of the term the Overton window and how the media seem to be complicit in extending that in one direction but not the other. And we'd love to know your thoughts on that. Thanks very much.
I love that car ride. I love Laura sort of sitting there talking to her husband and going, do you know what? I'm going to bloody ask them. Why
screw
did
it.
Do this? Yes,
I'm going to do it.
She's going to call it and say, what else are we going to do for 3 hours? I think it's a really, really good point, Laura. And I think this goes back to something fundamental, which is, do you shut out or do you kind of allow in? And the point about the Reform vote was they got 5 seats in the end. They got 4 million votes. You can go back a decade and say, actually, it was a very similar result to what UKIP got, in 2015 election, where they got sort of 4 million. So in some ways, that hasn't been a massive shift. In other ways, it's a brand new party that's happened after Brexit, and you can say they're still getting 4 million votes. So
Although in a lot of ways, it's sort of a continuation of.
No, but I'm saying it's happened after Brexit,
yeah, completely. No,
right?
I just mean that in a way, it
hasn't got the momentum of Brexit behind it. I guess the question is, and I think we all feel strongly in the sense that we are trying to reflect not just the overall vote and seat numbers, but the sense of feelings and passions and the sort of the stuff that's rippling beneath the waves. I definitely agree with you that 72 seats for the Lib Dems is arguably the kind of story of the night. I mean, it is astonishing to get from 11 to 72. And on that 12% of the vote, they've basically, they've broken the system. They've, for all their love of PR, the Lib Dems have found a way to get themselves into, I think, what has been our largest ever third party position, right? For a century.
Yeah.
Okay. And so I would go back to a conversation I had with Jacob Rees-Mogg on the stairs of the PopCon conference, actually, on Tuesday, where he was trying to argue that the Conservatives actually did get 11 million votes because he added in reform the Conservatives. Now, I think that is a really dangerous precedent to start setting, which is like you take other parties and you say, oh, we're all part of the same mix, particularly if it's reform. But if you wanted to do that with Labour, then we have to switch around this whole slightly kind of mean-spirited assumption that it was a loveless landslide because they only got 34% of the vote. And you have to say, what an incredibly astute, sophisticated electorate that now works out how it can vote tactically to provide the result that you want in each of the seats in which Lib Dems, Greens, in the Labour won. And I suppose that really is what we've learned from this election, as much as the headline figure of the share of the vote.
Yeah, I think it shouldn't be an either or. I think that reform do get attention and should get attention because, rightly or wrongly, Farage does command a solid basis of support in the country, and it really is largely about Farage. The question, of course, is whether he can build on that, on whether he's actually got the political chops to do it, whether he can kind of become a sort of slightly broader figure.
I think I'm just betting I'm going to see him in Milwaukee in Wisconsin with the Republican Party this week rather
Probably
than in
speaking.
the Commons. Yeah.
Welcome to Nigel Farage, the MP Clacton-on-Sea. And he certainly won't be. I don't think he'll be the most assiduous constituency MP. Let's put it that way. But and so that should be covered, and not least because it does have an effect on the kind of the alchemy of Conservative politics and kind of what they do next. But it is true to say that I think that it's often about kind of narratives, right, in coverage of politics, and it's not just in Britain, it's true in Europe as well. When the hard right or far right or whatever you want to call them, when they're on the march, literally and figuratively, it's something that gets covered a lot because it sort of conjures certain images. It's an easy sort of story to tell, and one that is kind of resonant. When the left do well, or the liberal left do well, or the Greens do well, or whatever, it often isn't covered to the same extent. I think completely wrongly, but it often isn't covered to the same extent because the story is often more complicated, or it doesn't sit as well. Certainly in the British context,
it's not as visual. Apart from Ed Davey and the bungee jumps, but there
it's not as sexy as a story, which is a weird thing to say and a horrible thing to say. But that is one of the reasons. I think that's completely wrong.
I do think though. I think the question that we are always struggling with, Laura. To take you into our sort of own mindset is, do you sort of carry on as if nothing's happened, which feels wrong? There is a reform presence here, and they did come second in 98, I think, seats in the country, and that is huge. So for us not to be talking about that in some shape or form risks us then looking like we are part of a bubble that cannot stand discussing things that we should be actually getting to grips with and asking questions about.
Not least because it affects the way both the Labour and Conservative parties act.
It really does.
Seats.
Everything, in terms of their immigration policies, that is going to affect it. I think the same is also true. I wrote a piece during the election campaign, which was the way to talk to Nigel Farage is to actually ask him about his policies, because he doesn't actually answer questions on those individual policies with any great sense of lucidation or enlightenment. And I do think that, our job is to sort of not just sort of put people on pedestals, but to get in and ask the questions of those who will be in power in any shape or form.
Okay, right. We've got a question now from Keane in Ireland, and he says, "Hi, news agents. I was wondering, with all these new cabinet positions being appointed, could you explain the difference between ministers, e.g., ministers of state, parliamentary secretary, parliamentary undersecretary, etc.? Which ones hold actual power in departments, and which ones are, to use a generous term, bag carriers?" Well, I believe that we have tracked down somewhere in the Greater Manchester area our own John Sopel, who has been given some thought to this question.
So the rankings are, you get a cabinet minister, which is the top table, and you sit around the cabinet room at number 10 Downing Street and you're tops. Below you is Minister of State, pretty senior, you're one off the cabinet. And again, depending on which department, Minister of State at the Home Office, Minister of State at the Foreign Office, Minister of State at Treasury, you are pretty senior. Below that is a parliamentary undersecretary, which is the most junior rank on the ministerial ladder, but you are still a minister, you are on the government payroll, and you will have ministerial responsibilities, but of a lesser order. You're not going to be, so for example, at questions in the Commons, when the different ministerial teams have their day, it's Home Office questions or whatever, you won't be answering as many questions or dealing with as bigger issues as the Home Secretary will. And then below that, you have the Parliamentary Private Secretary, which is an unpaid job. You're sort of on the government payroll, but not really. You're not being paid any more than a backbench MP would be for doing that job. And Parliamentary Private Secretary is a bag carrier. You are carrying out the wishes of that minister that you're serving, and you're hoping that the next job will be that first ministerial step on the ladder to be a parliamentary undersecretary in the government department of, paper clips and pencil sharpeners.
I think that was so comprehensive.
I don't think we need to add anything.
Lucky Keane.
Should we take a break after that comprehensive
A bit of a swig
tour d'horizon
of water.
Yeah. Right, welcome back. Hi, we've got a question now from Callum in Manchester, who says, "Hi, news agents team. I have a question I hope might be answered on a podcast." Well, it is, Callum. "I hear Keir Starmer has appointed Patrick Vallance and James Timpson to ministerial roles. What's the history of appointing non-MPs to these roles? How does it work in practice? And what does it indicate about how Starmer might govern? Thanks for all the work you all do."
It isn't the first time that non-MPs have been elected to these roles. Interestingly enough, there was this cross-party initiative about 4 years ago called the Commission for Smart Government, which wanted to explore how you could bring in
You wouldn't want the
talent.
Commission for thick government, would you? Or stupid.
It's brilliantly
Commission
named.
for stupid
but
government.
what should we call it? What should we call it? But it was basically an independent body that had been tasked with examining ways of making the machinery of government more effective. And I guess one of the questions that we're always asking is, how can you bring somebody into the fold for their talent, but still make them accountable if they do not have a constituency position, an MP's role? And it was to be honest, it was very difficult with Lord Cameron, wasn't it? Because he went straight into the Lords. They had to sort of do it through a select committee. The select committee never seems to have quite the sort of, the public reach, I guess, that PMQs does, or clearly that the Commons questions would. But I guess there are ways that you can do it. Oral hearings, committees, where you can bring people in. I mean, you can feel two things at once, which is Patrick Vallance, brilliant to have a scientist at the heart of government, brilliant to have all that expertise, somebody who's been through a pandemic. I think Timpson, it feels like an absolute genius appointment, somebody who spent their whole life looking at penal reform. His son, curiously, Edward, was a Tory MP, actually, took Glen Woody's seat, I think, Crewe and Nantwich. But you can have all that expertise and think that's a really exciting thing to do, and feel like you shouldn't necessarily be parachuting people into the Lords the whole time, because it sort of creates a bad precedent.
Yeah, I mean, like in our system, it is the only route to do it is the House of Lords. I mean, in the American system, where you can basically just have political appointees as long as they're approved of by the Senate, you can basically have experts, and that's really that's really normal. You can have expert people who come in and take political positions. But in our system, the only way to do it if you're not MP is you have to parachute them into the Lords. And there's a kind of like mixed history of it. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Do you remember when 2007, when Brown came in, he had
Digby
the government
Jones.
of all the talents, the
Goats.
goats.
Yeah.
The goats.
And Digby Jones.
Yeah,
got
who
in
had been
there
the
from
CBI, the
chief.
head of the CBI. He brought him in as a trade minister. They also had Alan West, who had previously been
Lord
in the Admiralty.
Admiral. Yeah, exactly.
To come in at MOD. And often they find, sometimes it works, but often, actually, funnily enough, a lot of these people who have often advised ministers, have been part of the civil service in some way or on the outside, can struggle to make the transition into kind of political life for all sorts of different reasons. And of course, as well, it can create for a prime minister party problems, which is that, there are only 120 ministerial posts, and they have a lot of MPs who are very keen to get on the ministerial ladder because they think they've done the hard yards, they've got selected and everything. So it has a mixed history in our system.
I had such an interesting chat at the Spectator Party on Tuesday night with somebody who had just lost their ministerial post, and they said, the trouble is, Emily, that I really enjoyed being able to affect actual change, actual proper, change people's lives. And I feel that, I'm not sure I did enough of that. And I said, it sounds like you should have joined the civil service. You actually could have had something that was much more concrete in the sense of, being part of the sort of machine of government and policy. And they looked at me and was like, yeah, you know what? I've always thought that. I just went into the wrong side of government.
Careers advice with Emily Maitlis.
Come back for more. Right, next one. This is from Kate, who says, I've only just realised the Speaker's constituency appears to have their democratic rights removed from them. This is Chorley, and it's our Speaker, Lindsay Hoyle. And if you look at the electoral map, there's this little bit of grey in the northwest, which is not a sort of reflection on him. It's a reflection on the fact that the Speaker's role tends not to be contested by the main
question.
No, I'm getting there. I'm just explaining what she meant. So they get voted in, which Hoyle did, but then they can't vote on anything or represent any party's policy or ideology. So am I right? The poor people of Chorley don't get the same choice of parties as everyone else to vote for, and then get an MP that can't vote on anything for them. So weird. Surely there's a better system. Your insight would be amazing on this. Well, that's what you think.
I mean, it is a crazy system. It is. I mean, it's just the way it's always been done. That the parties, Emily was saying, the parties by convention do not challenge the Speaker, whatever party. It was the same when Bercow was in Buckingham. And it just comes up on the ballot paper, Mr. Speaker or Madam Speaker, standing for re-election. And they always obviously tend to win. And there have been proposals over the years to change it. There's been a proposal to kind of create like a constituency for a small, tiny constituency, basically for Parliament itself. So as soon as you become Speaker, you in effect become the MP for that, and someone else then takes your seat. The argument against it has always been that actually it's good for the Speaker to still be a constituency MP, that they get their constituency mailbag, they stay grounded like any other MP and so on, because they still do the constituency stuff as any other MP would. But it is true to say that for the duration of a speakership, which tends to be about 10 years, the electors of that constituency are effectively disenfranchised.
I'm going to mention Buckinghamshire. Buckingham at this point.
Yeah.
And remind people that in 2010, when it was John Bercow's seat, as we've been recently reminded, Nigel Farage hates John Bercow with a passion. And Farage stood against Bercow when, the main parties hadn't. And so did Flipper the Dolphin, who I think was actually, it was like this weird car chase. So Farage was trying to contest Bercow and Flipper the Dolphin was trying to contest Farage.
Farage nearly died in that race.
Not because of Flipper the Dolphin.
I
think we should
because
clarify.
He crashed a plane. Or
crashed
not
a
personally,
plane.
he was on a plane that crashed because it was...
That's nothing to do with this story. Thank you very much.
Well,
okay. Anyway, the point is that you can have quite a sort of colourful election night nonetheless without any of the main parties contesting it. I guess it is conceivable that Bercow's seat could have been won by Farage or by Flipper the Dolphin, in which case that would have been the end of him, right?
It is possible. I mean, actually, funnily enough, if Hoyle hadn't been elected Speaker, which happened on the last day of the Parliament before the election in 2019, very likely he would have lost his seat as a Labour MP, because on the basis of all of the trends in that part of Lancashire, all of the other seats around it went Conservative in 2019. So
in 2019, so it saved him.
It saved him. Basically, being Speaker, I think, saved him as an MP. So there you go.
Dear newsagents, why are Tory MPs always over in the US giving speeches to Republicans? What is the motivation? How are they benefiting?
Ka-ching!
Best wishes, Rowan. To the tune of how much are they benefiting, I think might be the question we ask.
Yeah, I mean...
they've got a lot of money, Rowan. These things, you know that. That's why you asked.
It's not like popcorn over here.
Yeah,
you get a half-warm cup of tea and an egg sandwich.
Suella Braverman delivered her speech to Popcon, Popular Conservatives, from Washington. They all do it. And
they like the glam. It's glam.
It's glamorous. They get the flag flying behind them, and they get, nice business class flights. I'm guessing quite a lot of dosh.
You'll be amazed to hear, Emily, that John has some thoughts on this one. No, I know. You know, he used to be in America.
Oh, was he up North America?
He used to live in Washington.
Amazing.
He never mentions it, though.
You should discuss that more
He
on the podcast.
never mentioned it. He's very self-effacing.
Yeah.
Rowan, it's such a great question about why there are so many Tory MPs going over to Washington. Look, one answer is, of course, America is the most powerful country. There is a very strong kind of Republican Party or right-wing ecosystem where people want to get their voices heard. Dare I say that there is another motivation for senior politicians to go over to Washington? There is a thing called the Washington Speakers Bureau, which takes on a lot of former prime ministers to do the big speeches abroad. And whilst you might get a bit of money for doing it in the UK to be an after-dinner speaker, you get a lot more in America. And it can be a very handy way to tap in to large sums of money to talk to a room full of corporate grandees or whatever, and you pick up $100,000 or maybe $200,000 for your efforts, and you get flown over first class and all the rest of it. And also, a lot of the foundations in the US have very rich endowments. They've got a lot of money. And so they will also pay you to come over to speak to them. And so it's a sort of moth to a flame type thing as well, that these people are drawn to America because they see money, they see power, and they see an audience keen to hear them, where maybe people are just a little bit weary of them in Britain, where we're used to hearing them every day. And my favourite moment of last year was seeing Liz Truss at the CPAC conference, Conservative Political Action Committee conference, just outside Washington at National Harbour in Maryland. And one of the right-wing channels was carrying her speech live, and it just said at the bottom of the screen, Liz Truss, UK Prime Minister, September to October 2022. And it's sort of in its own way, although they were carrying her speech, put her in her place. But that is why they go. Can't resist it.
And so that was John.
That was John speaking to us from the Washington Speakers Bureau. Unfortunately, it's Washington, Tyne and Weir.
We'll be back after we've paid the bills.
Right, one final one. This is from Luke in Witney, the now Lib Dem constituency of Witney, of course. Sorry to be the first to bring up this topic, but when do you think the next general election will be? And would you agree that the size of the Labour win makes it more likely Starmer will go in 4 years' time in 2028? Oh, don't apologise, Luke. Don't apologise. We're already thinking about it. Got to start thinking about it. Look, I think it's quite simple, this, right? If things are going well, it'll be in 2028. If things are going badly, it'll be in 2029.
I'm sort of pushing back on this phrase, that people keep saying about the loveless landslide, because I just think we don't know. I definitely recognise there wasn't huge amounts of enthusiasm on every doorstep for what we've got. But I also think, going back to the point about tactical voting, people were just very strategic. That the one job I think the electorate felt they had this time round was kicking out the Conservatives, and they did that whichever way they could. And I genuinely think it is all to play for in terms of what Labour does now or what the world does to Labour, right? Keir versus Trump could be a really different contest to Keir working hand in hand with a Biden or a Kamala or somebody else. So on the international stage, who knows? On the economic stage, he's promised growth. He's got to deliver growth. In terms of how many things are broken right now in this country that they are promising to fix, we're gonna judge them on that. I mean, no two ways about it, right?
Yeah, the parliamentary deadline would be the end of July 2029. So I think you can even be even more specific, which is to say that if things are going well, it will be May the 4th, 2028, or if things are going badly, May the 3rd, 2029 because that
Either
will
way, it
coincide
won't
with
be.
the local elections,
Yes.
which we haven't done for ages, but which will be to
We
Labour's
should do.
advantage.
It's
So let's
much
put that in the
cheaper.
diary.
All right. And book your hotel in.
Book your hotel.
But also, it won't be in August.
It won't be in August, and I think it's unlikely to be in July. We'll get back to spring elections. At least we've broken the December election thing. That was worrying for a while. That was... Oh.
Yeah.
Rishi did
At
actually
least
do
it
us all
hasn't
a
been really
favour.
wet. Or
Rishi
anything.
did. No, that's true, and it's been such a glorious summer.
Glorious summer. Luke, thank you for that.
And we will see you next week.
We're off.
I
some
will
of
see
us.
you next week.
I'm going to
I'll
be
see you.
recording at weird times of day
You're going to be celebrating England's Euros win in Milwaukee,
in the Three Lions England pub.
the only place to be.
Yes,
I'm sure. I think
Yes.
really for this Euros final.
exactly.
Yeah.
Bye for now.
Bye bye.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.